Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Live911, What's in it for you? This information is brought to you by Commercial Electronics. If you'd like to learn more about any of our public safety solutions, visit commelectronics.com. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you're listening in using your computer speaker system, you're automatically muted to eliminate background noise. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select the handset in the audio pane at the bottom right, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can submit questions about Live911 at any time by typing your questions into the Q&A pane of the control panel, and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. My name is Beth English, and I'm the Program Manager for Commercial Electronics QA Program and Higher Ground Instructor. I've been in public safety communications for 33 years, most recently as a director before joining Commercial Electronics. By now, you've probably heard about Live911, whether in a YouTube video, a magazine article, or on one of the talk groups you belong to. And you've probably wondered what it was. You may even have had the same initial reaction that I did, which was an absolute no. In my mind, I pictured officers breaking in, asking their own questions, self-dispatching, and just basically taking over. I also thought it would be another way for them to be able to complain about the way we handle calls. Now, some of you may be thinking some of the same thoughts. So today we're going to go over details about what it is, how it works, and what it isn't. The idea of Live911 was that streaming 911 audio to responders would allow them to develop a better response plan from information being obtained in real time. They figured that they could eliminate delays, improve response times, provide better de-escalation on scene by formulating a plan in advance, and responders would be safer because they'd have better situational awareness. Live911 was the result. Now, the solution was to come up with a system that would let the officers hear the 911 calls in real time. It would allow them to hear information not entered into CAD or before it's sent to them in CAD. This way, they could get all the details in real time. It would also allow them to hear the urgency in the caller's voice. They could improve their response time by hearing and seeing the location before they receive the CAD call, which gives them a head start. And they get all updates in real time, and they can hear any situational changes. So how does this work? The system starts with a feed from your Alley, and calls are routed based on geofencing and location information provided by Rapid SOS. The officers can set a scan radius around their vehicle, or they can geofence their beat. When a 911 call comes in, the call is routed to a responder in the geofenced area that contains that location. So for instance, if you have 10 beats in your jurisdiction and a call comes in beat 1, the officers working that beat will receive the live feed through their MDCs based on the geofencing for that beat. So this limits the number of calls that they'll have directed to them. Now, if more than one call is received in this beat, all of those calls will route to them, but they can choose which one to listen to. And one thing to note is that when the call is routed to the officers, it's already in progress. So initially there's going to be a short lag time, but the call will catch up pretty quickly. And through the integration with Rapid SOS, the officer can see the exact location of the caller on a map at the time that the call is routed to him, rather than say, being dispatched to Pine Forest Apartments to look for the caller, he can see that the caller is outside Building 12 on the northeast side. He can also see where the other officers are, where his backup is coming from, and then he can gauge the ETA of his backup unit. You know, we've all had those incidents daily where we receive 20 calls for the same incident. But with Live911 mapping, the officer can see which calls are for the same incident and which calls are outliers and could be a different incident. So if you have an accident at Main and Elm and you're getting all these different calls, you may have another accident that happened because the looky-loos weren't paying attention, but the officer can see on his map that this call is on the other side of the road and a little bit north of that. So he can see that this is an outlier and this might not be the same call. Now, when a call is routed to an officer, it will display on his NDC. If he wants to see the CAD screen, he can minimize the Live911 screen. But if he has his Live911 screen minimized at the time that the call comes in, a pop-up appears and it'll have the location of the call, and then he can maximize Live911. Now, in the Live911 display, let me go back one, you can see two maps and a section where the calls are listed. One of the maps is a city map that shows the street level with addresses and the street view. The other map is a city view with the locations of the calls and the officer's locations. And this map updates every 25 seconds so it can show if a caller is moving. Now, at the upper left, you can see the list of calls in the officer's area, the distance, and the locations. You can also see there's other controls such as volume, mute, fast forward, and fast rewind. So these controls allow the officer to adjust the call to what he needs to be able to hear, or to cancel out of the call if he doesn't want to listen in. He can also fast rewind if he needs to listen to a certain section of the call. Now, as the call taker is processing the call, the officer can hear the emotion in the caller's voice. He can determine what kind of action he's going to take once he arrives on scene, and he can hear all the details being given that he might not receive until later in the call. So for instance, you receive a call about a robbery that just occurred, and the suspect was a white male driving a silver Mustang going southbound armed with a gun. The caller also tells you that the suspect is wearing a red shirt, green pants, and orange tennis shoes. But since the suspect left in the vehicle, that's what you get in the call sheet first, so the officers can look for that silver Mustang. Now, as the call goes out, your officer passes a dark gray Mustang. So he decides to light him up even though the car isn't exactly silver. You haven't gotten the clothing description in the call yet because you're doing EMD for the shooting victim. But because the officer heard it live while listening to the call, he knows as he approaches the driver that besides having absolutely no fashion sense whatsoever, he also happens to be wearing the exact same clothes he heard the caller describe. Now, he's got his suspect, and he didn't have to come back to you and ask you, dispatch, did the caller give you a clothing description for the suspect? Dispatch, did the caller give you a better description of the vehicle? Did you get an LP, or did they tell you what type of gun he was carrying? And all of this while you're trying to give pre-arrivals. The Live911 solution also comes with a dark mode for those officers that don't like the bright light shining in their face at night. Now let's look at some different ways that it can be used, not just by patrol officers, but others who are responsible for emergencies. With the mapping feature, Live911 can be used by watch commanders and patrol supervisors to keep track of the number of calls coming in, as well as which officers are tied up and who might need to be cleared for backup. The DFR programs can deploy drones to locations to clarify situations when the caller is unsure if the suspect is armed with a gun or if they have something else in their hand. And EOCs can use it to monitor hotspots during disasters and other high-volume situations. So Live911 can provide increased situational awareness in numerous incidents, and in multi-agency situations, it can help direct resources more quickly. So far, all we've talked about is how Live911 can assist law enforcement, but you should also consider incidents in which it can be used by fire and EMS agencies. Although we know that most fire and EMS personnel are not in the apparatus at the time the calls come in, so they would probably miss the beginning of the call during tone out. Having Live911 deployed in ambulances can give paramedics situational awareness while they're en route to calls, such as cardiac arrest, childbirth, drowning calls, things like that. They can hear the pre-arrival instructions being given and can prepare for the scene while they're en route. And then think about the high-intensity, low-frequency calls in which EMS has to stage until law enforcement clears the scene. So incidents like an active shooter situation, an armed suicidal subject, and overdose calls in which the patient is violent. So EMS can have the same situational awareness as law enforcement as they listen to the caller until the police can get to them to clear the scene. And then fire command vehicles could also benefit as they listen to callers describing situations on the scene of a structure fire, especially one where the caller is trapped and they're trying to give their location in the building. So with the command vehicle able to hear this information, they're better able to direct their resources to which side of the building, which door, which window, etc. Now, for configuration, the PSAT would need to have Live911 audio from the consoles or the 911 trunks, same as they're done to the existing recording system. Live911 needs an alley feed, integration to Rapid SOS if that's used. It would be installed on your server, customer provided server, and then, we'd need whatever type of recorder or logger is installed. In the police vehicles, we need the MDC model for police vehicles, the total number of field officers, and then the number of concurrent simultaneous field users per shift. And then in the command center, you'd have to have the watch commander and EOC licenses, and then if you have a DFR program, licenses for that. Now, let's talk about what it's not before we get to questions. Live911 is not a system to replace telecommunicators. It's a tool to enhance officer safety and provide better responses. The agencies who use it now have said that they have a better understanding of what communications does, and the officers have said that they have more respect for their dispatchers. And it's even strengthened the partnership between communications and patrol. Now, many have voiced the concern that the officers will have too much going on in their vehicle and that this is only going to add to their stress by listening to the actual 911 call. And in some cases, it's probably going to make them respond more quickly, adding to chances of accidents and things like that, just because they're listening to the caller's voice and, you know, the caller's yelling or hysterical or whatever. However, most of the beat officers know the regulars in their beats, and a lot of times they're going to have more of an idea of what's actually happening at the scene. So their response is also going to be based on their knowledge and not just the emotion in the caller's voice. There have also been calls with agencies that are currently using this where officers were able to respond because the location showed up on the mapping on their Live911 screen, even though the caller was too hysterical to give the location. So the officer was able to respond and begin CPR before the address was even obtained. So you can see that there's a lot of information that the officers will get that will help them with their response. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to replace us as call takers or dispatchers. And it doesn't mean that we are relieved of the duty of ensuring that all of this information is recorded in the CAD call. We would still be doing the job the way that we're supposed to do it. You're still going to get the same information. You're still going to enter the same information in the call sheet, because every call sheet that you do is a legal document, and you still have to have all the same information. So the difference between what you're doing and what the officers are going to be able to do with Live911 is just that they're going to be able to maybe respond a little bit more quickly, because the caller gives the address and they realize that they're a block away and they can start that direction. They may also be able to better respond because they're hearing what the caller is saying. And even though you're going to put this in the call sheet, they're hearing it same time you are. And so that lag time between the time it's entered into CAD and it's actually updated on their MDC will be gone. So it's going to help the officer's response. And I believe it's going to help the response for EMS and fire also. So I've had a question asked. So the officer would have to ensure their own safety versus the dispatcher ensuring officer safety. Not necessarily. They're going to hear exactly what you're hearing. So you're still going to enter the same information. You're still going to dispatch the same information, but you're going to still dispatch back up however many units. It's not going to change your policy or your procedures as far as what you're going to do. Of course, we all know that officers with MDCs, they self-dispatch, they jump calls, they do that all the time. And so they're still going to do what they're going to do, but they're going to have just a little bit more knowledge of what's going on the scene, just based on everything that they're hearing. And even though we're responsible for their safety, they're also responsible for their safety. So it's not going to change any of that. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because I figured there would be plenty of questions. Okay, another question, would the officer only in that beat hear the call, or would, say, for instance, a supervisor hear the call as well? So it really would depend on how the supervisor is set up. If he is geofenced for the entire city or the entire jurisdiction, then he would hear every call that came in that jurisdiction. Whereas the officer, if he's just set up for that beat, he's only going to hear the calls that come in that beat. Any other questions? You're welcome. Is there a way to filter out calls? If you're talking about a way to filter out, say, fire and EMS versus police calls, no, not currently. It has been suggested, probably going to be looked at, but at the moment, any 911 call that comes in is going to go to whoever is geofenced in that area. So if you get a fire call in beat 1, the officer is also going to hear that fire call, which actually also could be very helpful because he can start towards that, and you know how the officers like to go to fire calls because they're kind of exciting. Is this only for 911 calls, or can it be used with admin calls? This is only for 911 calls. It's going to come in on your 911 trunks or however your system is set up, but it's only 911 calls. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to, I will leave this up and I will stay here to answer any other questions that might come in. And this informational video will be available to you after the call is over. It'll be sent to you in an email. So you will be getting this within the next 24 hours. And any other questions, you can check out our website at comelectronics.com, and we have information there, and you can also contact any of us. Tell about Rapid SOS using Live911 versus Rapid SOS. Okay, Rapid SOS, the difference between using Live911 and Rapid SOS is the streaming of the 911 call. That's the difference. Rapid SOS, you have the information, and I believe you have to, if you want to get location on a phone number, I think you have to type in the phone number. With Live911, you're going to get that location with that phone number anyway. So that would be the biggest difference, is the streaming 911 call and then the location being automatically available. Okay. Like I said, you can check out our website, comelectronics.com, and we'll be happy to give you more information, answer more questions. I know that when you think about it, you're going to have a lot more questions, and so we can answer any of those for you. And if you have any other questions that you want to contact me directly, definitely do so. And otherwise, I want to thank you for joining our informational session, and have a great day.